Across the Mississippi River now, the Illinois Department of Children and Family Services needs more workers. During the governor's State of the State address last week, Governor Pritzker says the agency will reach 4,000 employees. It's the largest number in 2 decades. That means that it would need to add more than 500 employees. Specific needs include frontline staff, direct service staff, and administrative positions.
This is an incredibly rewarding job, and the culture of the team at DCFS is an unbelievable place to be a part of. And it doesn't take long, 5 minutes in that room with those people, and they realize these are compassionate people who believe deeply in this mission and give up much of their time and their life in order to keep other families safe.
Now, DCFS is hosting a hiring fair on March 27th at the Fountains Conference Center in Fairview Heights. Prospective employees can learn about different jobs, interview, get fingerprinted, and start their background checks.